Hey everybody, this is Emmy Thomas. I'm here with Inigo M. Inigo M, I'm going to ask you the same question I ask everybody. What is it like to be you?
Um, it's a good question. That's a lot behind that. If I just say practically, you're going to be tired if you're me. I'm so I have been diagnosed with ASPD and clear evidence of conduct disorder as a child, very early evidence of that as a kid. And got it, believe it or not, was able to avoid. I had skirts and brushes with the law, but never was convicted of any kind of a crime. I grew up in the country.
Mm.
So when you grow up in the country and there's hundreds of acres behind your house and a pond and there's just so much stuff you can get into just in the name of boys will be boys or kids will be kids, and knowing what I know now and having been in therapy for years, you know that um man, that was some pretty crazy stuff. And the intention wasn't to hurt anybody or anything like that, but it was just when you look at what other kids were doing, you realize, yeah, that was pretty far out. And again, it really wasn't anything malicious. It was just in the name of fun or just excitement or um, but you go back and you look now and you're like, man, if my kids did that, I would kill them. But yeah, I'm busy, and a lot of us are. I am a what would be called a subclinical psychopath or subclinical sociopath. I also have borderline personality disorder, so I'm quiet BPD and ASPD. But I come from on both sides of my family, my mom's side and my dad's side, mental health issues on both sides and some sociopathy, ASPD type stuff on both sides. So um, my father was most certainly a psychopath, abusive, drug using, serial adulterer. He even had pseudonyms.
Mm.
He got he actually violated a couple of trademark or excuse me, copyright infringements and almost like went to federal prison over that. But so yeah, I mean, all the signs and symptoms of ASPD. So that was my father, and then my mom's side of the family. My mother is wonderful, but her people, she's got a long line of uncles and cousins that had either shot people or had been shot and would be really nice, but then if you crossed them they would like set your car on fire. And this was, yeah, stuff like that. So um that's pretty heavy stuff, but you know I like to say by God's grace I've overcome that and quite a bit, but it's still, it still can be challenging. But I think it's challenging, you asking me what's it like to be me. I think it's challenging in a different way because sometimes I don't feel I'm at war with myself as much as I'm at war with the world.
Mm.
And I have to constantly think about ways to be a pro-social sociopath. And my whole life's been that way. And so while other people don't really have to work at that, I have to think about ways to be kind and gentle and the tone of my voice, and everything like that. But it's worked. I mean, two master's degrees, and I'm a professional, and I've father, been married for almost 27 years.
Wow,
So yeah,
congratulations.
yeah, I'm in my 50s. And so, you know, um, now a lot of my friends that I grew up with, um, they're either dead or went to prison or, changed their life There's one guy in particular changed his life through becoming a Christian and ministry work, and it's legit. I mean, he's still doing that to this day. But for the most part, that's a pretty rare thing that I found. I've got one guy I used to hang around with. He's in prison now for murdering his mom. Um, yeah, so that just kind of gives you the idea of some of the people that I would rub shoulders with and hang around as a kid. And it's my my therapist says it's an absolute miracle that you didn't turn out to be like a serial killer or something. Um, and we laugh about it, but he said just your background and the environment you were in. He said the fact that you had a great mom, even though your dad was a monster, you had a great mom and your faith, because I've heard you talk about this too, like in a Jeremy Bentham utilitarian way, that you just refuse to violate your moral presuppositions.
Yeah.
And you live by, and I'm the same way. I mean, I love God and love people, and I'm not going to violate that. But another thing too that's interesting is that like another way I don't fit in and never have is like politically I don't fit in very neatly into the Republican or the Democratic Party. I tend to be more of a libertarian.
Yeah.
Um,
Me too.
don't hurt me and don't take my stuff. Live and let live, and more of a that kind of a person. And even though I may think that, like, theologically and philosophically, that like the things that you personally want to do are evil or immoral or whatever, I think that as long as you're not hurting anybody else, I think you ought to have the right to do them.
Mm.
Um, so, and that obviously brings me into conflict with people like of my theological background.
Mm.
Um, but I can go back to the New Testament and point out to them. Paul said, "Look, mind your own business and lead a quiet and peaceful life." Well,
Yeah.
that's kind of sounds like libertarianism, but yeah, it's I like to talk about a lot of different stuff. I like music. I play several instruments. Um, have been in a couple different bands, both church bands as well as secular bands, and yeah, I mean, and I love talking about psychology, psychiatry. I took psychology in college, like minored in it, because I wanted to figure out why my father did what he did. And then as we're in the behavioral psychology class and we're covering personality disorders, and they're
Mm.
they're going through the descriptions, I'm like, oh boy, yeah. And I said I can never talk to anybody about this. And so I refused going to a counselor or anybody like that for probably 2 decades. And finally, I just said, "Yeah, I'm going to go. I'm going to go to a counselor. I'm going to figure out. I'm going to get a formal assessment and figure out. I mean, I knew what the results would be, because like we were talking about before the recording, that when you have this type of personality disorder, I think among the cluster Bs, I think that the people that have ASPD, they know what they are, and they know from a very early age, and and I'm talking, like, for me, I could say 6 7 years old. I mean, I knew, and I thought it was like a superpower. I thought it was like, I've got some kind of great insight that nobody else has. But I go back and I look and I realize that, no, your personality was just so radically different from everybody else's,
Yeah.
that you just did not see the world through the same goggles that everybody else does. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I sometimes say that it's like I learned that New Zealand didn't have any mammals on it until man found New Zealand, I guess. So
Yeah.
it was like an island of birds, and so the birds all had these defense mechanisms specifically for other birds. So like ground birds would just be very still because most of the time the predators would be, flying high up in the sky, and
Right.
standing very still was a pretty good defense mechanism. And then rats came on the scene, and standing very still for a rat doesn't matter. And that's how I kind of felt. It's not even so much a superpower. It's just that when everybody else, normal people, are kind of defending against these like known threats of like other birds, for instance, and I'm a rat, and I'm just gonna eat you, you know, like
Yeah.
your defense mechanisms don't work with me. So that's the main advantage, I guess, that it is. And I still think that's the main advantage that it is, you know, with regard to, let's say, intertribal warfare, you
Yeah.
know, however that plays out over our history, is that if your tribe had some psychopaths in it, then you're probably going to do better at
Yeah.
intertribal warfare than if you did not have psychopaths.
Right.
So
Right.
that's
And
the
right. Exactly. And I think too that this is one of the reasons why the ongoing problem of domestic violence continues to be an issue
mm,
because women naturally, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes they want a man that can protect them
mm,
and can provide, you know, set a perimeter, protect the perimeter, protect the nest, and that's what they want. And they tend to pick the dudes that are the, you know, uh, mildly to moderately clinical psychopathy, and they have CTE,
mm,
from playing football in college. They have brain damage from playing foot. So that, they got frontal lobe damage already. And then you pile on top of that a small or completely non-functional amygdala. And then by the time they get into their 30s, and that can be, it's no wonder. That's a serious problem. So I've actually witnessed that, like in my career. I've
mm,
I've seen that. And had to like with some of my clients, I've had to do, help get them into some mental health care because their lives are just falling apart because they clearly had ASPD and among other things, from uh, and then I was able to get them hooked up in the mental health system, and it saved their marriage, it saved their career, so but yeah, but you can recognize a lot of times other psychopaths. And sometimes it is like herding wet cats, but other times, depending upon the way that the psychopath, this again, that huge spectrum of that personality disorder, I found that, I tended to cluster with them when I was a kid. I would tend to I would attract those kind of people to me, and or other people that had issues, that were issues, but they were what I call power people. You didn't mess with them, and they were the people that smoked cigarettes and wore the black leather jackets, or you know, um, you just didn't mess with them. And but they, for some reason, and I still to this day, I'm just like, why did they ever come to me for advice? I didn't know anything. I was an idiot, just as much as they were. But for some reason, my whole life has been like that.
mm,
Um, and I guess, like people like me tend toward corporate psychopathy. Like we tend toward, high level business. We tend toward medicine, law, and I went toward medicine. So, but I will tell you this, that it's very interesting because my part of my career can involve emergency medicine,
mm,
like paramedic type stuff, and brains and guts and gore and stuff like that. And that has never bothered me. I mean, to me it's just like eating pizza. I'm not trying to equate the two, of course. I realize there's an ontological difference, and but it just for example, I had to go to some continuing education training last week for work that my company sent me to. And we had to learn had to review how to put on tourniquets from a um, uh, like individual first aid kits, IFAKs. And we were doing that, and they would show videos of the effectiveness of a tourniquet on a real live person that had like blood shooting out of the femoral artery in the leg. And they, of course, they warned us. And it was interesting because I turned on my heart rate monitor, and I wanted to see what would happen to my heart rate when I was watching these videos. And my heart rate's pretty low anyways, because I work out. And you could see other people in the room getting nervous and a little bit antsy. And these are professionals. These are people that have dealt with this before, but they still got there. You could tell they still, even after years of doing it, they just still can, it could get them a little antsy. And me, man, I was just hanging out, like my feet were up, just hanging back, and my heart rate was like 56. And when they started playing the blood squirting videos, it went down to like 49. And I just got, it didn't bother me at all. And so that's an example of how, like, when the crap hits the fan, um, man, I mean, people like us can really keep it together and can really help a lot of people. um, it's psychopathy in a pro-social way, and we can just get it done. We can execute the plan because we're just not bothered by those types of things. Yeah. But I know that's all over the place. I do fly in circles when I talk, but
Yeah, one of the other psychopaths I met called it like chaos brain, and another
yeah,
one said it's very lateral thinking. It's not linear. It's
right.
like circle around a topic. I know, and it's interesting because you've said so many things that I want to pick up on, and I probably will pick up on. I'll start with uh, the heart rate. I have found that there seems to be a correlation between hovering about like 60 in the
Hmm.
60s for resting heart rate, like even without working out. Like I don't work out that much and I'm in that range, and my girlfriend same thing. She started working out more, but she's basically always in that range, and sometimes it gets lower for her. I don't have a heart rate monitor, so I don't know if it gets much lower for me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's it another thing too is like when, and again, I'm not trying to be dark and heavy, but just another example of this. When I was a kid, um, my father was very abusive, and you would hear screaming and all that kind of mess going on in the middle of the night. And I never, now there was always the question, man, is this dude going to kill us? I remember my sister's 9 years older than I am. And we would ask each other, man, are we going to make it? But it was kind of like, it was almost like a Star Wars movie. Like we're being chased by the Empire, and we're in the Millennium Falcon. Man, are we going to make it? Yeah, I think we're going to make it. It was more like a movie than it was reality. Because I just was comfortable with the chaos, and I could be comfortable in the chaos. And that's probably why, I gravitated toward the field that I did. Um, I'm pretty sure of it. And then but another thing too, like is I'll remember that up until the age of 11, I would, and it wasn't to be, it was more like I would torture animals and set fires, but it wasn't just to torture animals to be mean. It was to, I was just curious. I was like, what's inside of these things? What makes them work? And, I figured that was fine. I didn't think anything of it. Um, but one day I picked up my sister's cat. I was 5 years old, and I picked the cat up, and I said, I wonder what would happen if I grabbed this cat by the tail and just slung it around and hit its head upside the brick chimney. And yeah, yeah, exactly. And I did that. I swung around in a big, huge circle like a centrifuge, and the cat was on the, yeah, yeah. So, and hit the cat's head upside and you believe that cat lived? I mean,
Wow.
man, that was a tough cat. But I took the cat inside and I said, something's wrong with the cat. She looked at me. She said, what'd you do? And I said, well, it clawed me. And it didn't. It didn't claw me. I had to have a justification. She said, what'd you do? And I said, well, I bashed its head up against the chimney. And she looked at me. She didn't get mad at me. But she looked at me like, oh my gosh, there is something seriously wrong with this kid. And but I was, nice and smiley and innocent. And she said, well, take him next door to the vet, because we had a vet that lived next door to us. And I took him over to the vet, and the vet's looking at me. There's blood running out of this poor cat's ears, and he's looking at me like, what happened? I'm like, well, he scratched me, and I threw him against the wall. And he's like, how many times did you how many times did you throw him against the wall? And I was like, I don't know. And of course, I'm lying through my teeth as a 5-year-old, almost 6-year-old kid. But yeah, I mean, it was there was a lot of things like that that happened. Like fire setting. I remember one time my parents bought me this huge, I don't know if you remember these because you kind of grew up about the same time I did, but these huge like foam airplanes, the gliders that you could glide across your yard. I mean, like they had a wingspan of like 6 feet and they were made of styrofoam, the tougher styrofoam. They're pretty, like the coolers are. And I took one, like we would take those and get on top of my dad's shed and we would pour gas in because you know what gas does to styrofoam, it melts it. Well, we would
Yeah.
like, hey man, let's see what this will do. And we would pour gas on that and then set that on fire and then just throw that across the field in the middle of August and it hadn't rained in like 4 weeks. And then we'd set the field on fire and be like, oh man, this is amazing, and but those are some of the dudes that I hung out with. And again, the issue was you lived in the country and there's a pond right there, and you could put it out as long as you caught it early enough. And it was just the excitement and the boredom of just being bored all the daggone time. And that is a persistent problem that I have even to this day.
Oh,
I'm
really?
constantly, I mean, I'm a jack of all trades and a master of none. Multiple instruments I play. I like to learn new Spanish words and can speak Spanish and decently. I want to read different kinds of books. Kind of like Da Vinci, but definitely not as smart as Da Vinci was. I just like studying everything. I like doing everything. And as I get older and um, I start to develop some health issues, I can't do physically the things that I would like to do. But it definitely, I mean, I think, you asked me what's it like to be me. I mean, I think it's been pretty doggone fun. Some of it, I believe now, I want to say this too, that none of that stuff that I did to animals as a kid, absolutely unethical. I think it's, from my worldview, it's sinful, it's unethical. I do not advocate it. I love animals. I have, 2 dogs and a couple of cats, and we love them, but they're there. We consider them, they're like part of my family. But yeah, I mean, it was there. Those early signs were definitely there. And when you're in psychology class and you're a junior in college and you're studying this stuff, like academically, you're like, oh, yeah, I can't talk to anybody about this. And so, but that's really why I avoided shrinks and counselors for so long. And it took a while, but um, my wife was like, yeah, I think it'd be good for you. And so I did that, and it was something. The first counselor, check this out. The first counselor I went to, when I told her, she's a very nice lady, and she was a trauma therapist. And when I went to her, she's she listened to my story, and her jaw dropped. She was taking notes and her jaw dropped. She dropped her pen. She was like, you got to be kidding me. I said, yeah, that happened. That happened. And she was like, oh my gosh. We got done. And then she called me like 2 days later. I'd set up for like the next month to see her like once a week or whatever. And she called me, that was a Wednesday. And she called me the following Friday. She said, listen, she said, I've talked to my supervisor about your case. And she said, your case is extremely complex. And she says, I've never, you know, um, never really dealt with somebody with the nature of your situation. She said, I'm gonna send you some people that I think would be a good fit for you, that'll deal with more high level stuff. And so I was like, oh, okay. And she did, and I got hooked up with one of them, and it's been going great. I've been meeting with that counselor for several years now, and then meeting with one of his recommended psychiatrists. And my counselor told me, he said, I've counseled hundreds of people, trauma, and he said, yours, he said, out of the like, he said, you're in the top 3 worst I've ever heard. I was like, really? And he's like, yeah. He's like, he said, that's some of the worst stuff I've ever heard. And I was like, oh, okay. So I try not to dwell on it. You know, people don't want to hear that stuff, and I get it. But, you know, going through this and having to not only live with ASPD, but having been abused myself, I'm a huge advocate for, you know, supporting women who have undergone domestic violence. But I'll tell you what really stinks is there's really not much out there for children.
Hmm.
Um, there's just not much out there. You know, they have, you know, DSS and that kind of thing, but there's just
What's
not.
DSS?
Department of Social Services.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. You know, they've got that, but that's a that's a system that's fraught with a lot of, at least in my state, that's a system that's fraught with a lot of problems. You know, there's a tremendous amount of abuse that can, you know, in cluster B, as you know, there's a genetic component, but there's also that environmental piece that if you take a cluster B person, especially somebody with ASPD, and they grow up in a good family, man, they can grow up to be, I mean, surgeons, special forces, you know, and if you just can direct it in the right way and have an appropriate, and that's kind of what I'm trying to do with, if I see other, I help teach martial arts to
Hmm.
children and jujitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and I try to. There are kids in there, and I can see it. I mean, you know, I can see it already, and I try to. They know that I get them,
Hmm.
and they'll come up to me after class and give me kind of that side hug. You know, they don't want to give me a real hug, you know, but they'll give me that little sociopath hug,
Yeah.
that little side hug, because they know I get them,
Yeah.
and they know that there's a kinship there. But yeah, I mean, it can be a challenge living with this because I constantly have to adapt myself like a chameleon to others, because I don't have, I mean, I don't have empathy. I don't, I never have, but I have a boatload of cognitive empathy. That's another thing too, is like, everyone's like, you're not empathetic. No, I am empathetic, but you realize there's like multiple different types of empathy. There's not just you know, quiver in the liver empathy. You know, I don't have that, but you know, I got a boatload of cognitive empathy, you know, so, um, I think maybe something I wanted to talk about was, you mentioned the word chicken people. I've heard you mention that before. Can you kind of explain to me, like in your own words, a way to capture what that is? Because I've heard you talk about that. I don't know if I've ever heard a clear definition of it from you. And when I hear you talk about it, I'm like, yes, that is a great description of what it's like to live with this. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think of chicken people, they're like living in kind of like this shared, altered reality
Mm,
in which they are like largely blind to certain things and really obsessed with other things in kind of like just a similar way. I don't know what. I mean, it's kind of like a constellation of traits, just like psychopathy.
right.
But like, I'll give you an example. So I just, I watch movies during my lunch time and
Hmm.
just 20 minutes and then like stop and then keep watching it. So I was watching the movie Precious. Have you ever seen that one?
No, no.
I think it's 2009 or something. She's overweight. Spoiler alerts, she's been raped repeatedly by her dad and had two babies by him.
Mm,
Her mom's terribly abusive, like there's a scene where she like dodges a frying pan like
hmm.
like the heavy kind, the I forget what they're called, don't wash them kind, and so she's just getting like, and she's like 14 or something, and she's already, and her first baby was Down syndrome because probably the incest or whatever,
Right.
so it's just like kind of this crazy stuff. And then I was on Reddit thread recently where people are talking about, you maybe have heard of it, probably not, but there was a YouTube Mormon personality and kind of going by the name Eight Passengers. I think
Hmm.
Ruby Frankie is the name, and she recently pled guilty to child abuse for
Mm,
like a in I think it's called indeterminate sentence of 4 to 30 years. So minimum
Wow.
of 4, possibly 30. And people were like, she should have gotten life. She should have gotten the death penalty. And
Mm,
I'm like, for what? Because they like kind of starved and wouldn't give the babies drinks sometimes. And they like made them work and they like duct taped them to chairs. And they're involved a situation where she kicked them with a boot. She was wearing a boot and she kicked,
mhm.
and I'm just like, that's like the chicken people concern. Their concern's not about precious, and just
Right.
like this, they're not about like children losing limbs in Gaza. It is like this
Yeah.
weird kind of like filtered version of life where they get really upset about things like here's one that my own parents did recently. They went to their friend's house and I live in the world of taco shops. And so there's this really good taco shop, but they were like, come over for dinner. And they had bought food from this taco shop and then put it on nice plates. And my parents were like, this is crazy. How disrespectful to us.
Wow.
I don't know why.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was the nice plates or if it was the taco shop stuff or whatever, but people just kind of like they get worked up about certain things, really worried and kind of hyper
Yeah.
focused about certain things to the detriment of like other things. And it doesn't really make sense, but they're all acting kind of in this same way that's almost like a group think. I think that's also the
Yes.
yeah.
That's
Kind of
the
like
click stuff.
yeah, like
We
regular
we were
chickens, pecking order, they're
right.
just hyper focused on kind of like what's in front of them. And like you could leave the gate open or something, they're not going to escape. They're just going to stay there, because
Yeah.
they're not even like, they don't even try to become aware of the broader world.
That's kind of what I was getting at earlier, when we were chatting before the recording about clicks.
Mm,
I could see, like, I can remember back, I mean, even in the first and second grade, I can just, hey man, you got to have a swatch. Remember the swatches, the watches that were real popular, and they were
mm-hmm.
kind of cool. Man, how come you don't have a swatch, dude? Because everybody's got a swatch, and I'm like, why do I need one? I like my Casio data bank. It can do a whole lot more than your Swatch. And, I can swim with it on. And they're like, yeah, but it looks stupid, makes you look like a nerd. And I'm like, I don't care. Why do I need to impress you? Tell me who said that. What command from on high said that I need to make all of these different people happy? And,
And why is
again, it
Swatch
is
the answer to that?
right. Yeah,
Where did you
right.
guys even get that from?
Where did
That is
that
a
come
perfect
from?
example of chicken thought.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying is I just saw that over and over and over and over again in different ways and formats. And because of that, I've never fit in
Mm,
with anybody.
yeah.
I see it with a lot of my, friends at church or whatever. And there's conversation about, you know, a certain politician. And I'm like, you do realize that like he's got all of the signs and symptoms of, multiple personality disorders, all mixed together. And they're like, huh, what? I'm like, you can look this up. I mean, this isn't, I'm not saying you need to go to Dr. Google for all of your, to answer all of your questions, because it can be a abomination of misinformation. But, why can't you see this? I mean, I'm not a psychologist and I don't play one on TV, but I can see this. I can read the DSM, and I can see this guy is clearly disordered. Why can't you see it? And why is it okay? Why are we giving him a pass? You know, and why don't we give these other politicians a pass? Okay, so we're going to pick on the other politician because he's got, grade 1 or grade 2 early onset dementia, signs and evidences of that. Okay, great. But why aren't we talking about the other guy and what he's done and what he's doing, and how he was lifelong associated with a particular political party, and then a few years before he ran to become president the first time, he changed his party. Why aren't we talking about that? I mean, can't you see how manipulative that is? I can. Well, why is it? Well, because I'm a psychopath. I can see it. I see through my baloney detector, is just always finely tuned. And I'm the emperor with no clothes kid. I'm like, well, you do realize the emperor has no clothes, right? And they're like,
Yeah.
what? What do you look at his robe? It's beautiful. I'm like, dude, and I'm grasping at the floor, grasping invisible air. I'm like, look, there's no robe here. And they're like, no, it's beautiful. It's red and gold. And the other person over here says, yeah, it's red and gold. I'm like, what? What are you smoking? And that's the way I feel. I feel like that little kid in that book, a lot of times, but you just get used to it. So what's it like to be me? I mean, life has always been that way for me. Um, Life has always been that way for me. I've always felt like I was the kid that saw that the emperor had no clothes on, and everybody else around me's like, no, look, the guy, look at, he's unbelievable, royally dressed. And I'm like, yeah, he's royally naked. And and again, that's what I mean when I say like a superpower. I'm not saying that you can just see through the malarkey. I remember when I was a kid, I was 7 years old. My dad, because he couldn't find or didn't want to find a babysitter, he would take me to bars. So he was getting into going to bars and dancing. And I remember being a 7-year-old kid. And this was before they had the rule that like you had to be 21 to sit at a bar. Anybody could sit at a bar. You just couldn't drink as long as, you had to be 18 or older back then. But I remember just sitting at the bar, and I think, we would go somewhere where they had like a grill and they'd give me a hamburger, and I sit there and eat my hamburgers in like the second grade. And I'm sitting there and it's Thursday night. I'm 7 years old and I'm like, what the heck am I doing here? And I would have like one of his friends, his female friends would come up that he was flirting with. And of course he's married. And, I'm like, hey, I want to go home. I'm tired. It's 9 o'clock. I got to get up the next morning, go to school and be in second grade. And I got homework to do. And I've been here for like 2.5 hours. And these women would come up, and they would smell like a mixture of beer and liquor and cigarettes and cheap perfume. And I'm just like, oh, would you please just get off? This is just a game. All of you are here playing a social game, and I'm 7. Now, obviously, I didn't know that vocabulary to explain it, but I'm like, this is so stupid. Um, but you could just as easily look at the stuff I did, at that age and say, dude, you took a plane, lit it on fire on purpose, and threw it into a field that was like crispy dry on purpose just to see what would happen. And my response was, well, that's a whole heck of a lot more interesting than sitting around a bar with stinky people that got cigarette breath and smell like cheap perfume and are sweating all over me and sweating all over each other and doing it late at night. I don't know. I get it. It's kind of the pot calling the kettle black. I get that. But I don't know. I think it's just why are you doing this? And I never could. That's the one thing that being formally diagnosed helped me understand
Mm.
later in life when I was formally diagnosed. I was able to understand why I was like that and how there were so few other people that were like that. And typically we clustered together. Like the sociopaths, psychopaths tended to sometimes cluster together. It wasn't always you know, herding wet cats, as I mentioned earlier. Um, but they typically tend to be together in contexts that are either very competitive or involve strategy. Like for me, it was martial arts.
Mm.
You would tend to there tended to be, at least in the circles I ran in, they were people that realized, hey, I need to find something to do because I get bored very easy. I like excitement, and energy, and adventure, and I'm going to have to find something to do or else I'm going to end up in prison. And, I need to channel this in a good direction. And I think a good pop level book for people like us to read is the Good Psychopath by Tyler McNabb and Kevin Dutton. It's
Mm.
recommended on the Psychopathy is website. That's a pretty good book, and I'm reading through that right now. But as I read it, I'm like, yeah, it talks about when they were testing Tyler McNabb. He's a special forces guy, professional trained special forces guy for the UK. And when Kevin Dutton was doing the tests on him, because they were buddies, and he's showing all these gruesome images, and Tyler's just sitting there like, dude, I'm hungry, man. when is this going to be over? And he's like, dude, I hate, I don't hate to, he said it, I hate to tell you, but I know it's not going to bother you, but dude, you're a, you're a psychopath, man. You got ASPD. He's like, okay. But he goes on and talks about how you can be a very, very pro-social psychopath, sociopath, and do a lot of good for the world. And it doesn't have to be, just in military and combat and the use of violence as a tool to help others, but it like I mentioned earlier, medicine, law, anywhere where you need coolness under pressure. Um, and
Yeah,
that's where you can
or
be
that.
really objective when you see the chicken people doing the chicken people thing, especially as like a lawyer or a doctor or whatever. You can be really cool under pressure and get done what needs to get done for the benefit of everybody. Um, Go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
Oh no, I actually interrupted you. So I totally agree. It's with you, you said what I was going to say is that the advantage is that we just have different blind spots. You know, we don't have the
Yeah.
chicken people blind spot. We have, and here was something that kind of frustrated me though. When I went to law school, I was like, this is great. I love this so much, especially the law school I went to was
Mhm.
known for like they were libertarian, you know, they're very,
Oh, cool.
yeah, like law and economics, you know, so like a
Wow.
very kind of different approach to law. Like we never talked about our feelings. We never talked about they said like the only four-letter word you can't say in class is fair, you know, because what does fair mean? It's so subjective. So it was like
Yeah.
everybody just kind of learned this like second language of law and economics to talk about things, not necessarily whether a law was good or bad, but like whether it actually did what it was supposed to do. That's like the
Right.
focus. So my brain just loved that. I was like, oh, finally, I'm in a land where there aren't chicken people and the law.
Yeah.
That's the answer, or whatever. Then I got out of law school and I got like involved in litigation, and it's like I don't know. The population of judges who are chicken people is about the same as the normal population. So you'd run into all these chicken people
That
judges.
makes sense.
Ugh, and it's terrible because you're
I
like,
mean,
but
just
the
from a
law
voting,
says
like
this.
because they get voted, they're voted in.
Yeah,
So that
voted,
that
chosen
makes
by
that
their
makes sense.
peers.
Yes. Yeah. You vote for me, I'll scratch your back and give you this. And yeah, that I could see that.
So I was really disappointed in that. But there are like, for instance, the stock market. Perfect example of where seeing, you know,
Hmm.
things other than a chicken person way is like very advantageous because it doesn't kind of like to a certain extent it matters. You know, there's like meme stock trading happening or something. And if you're like, I guess, really deep into chicken people ideas, then you could do the meme
Hmm.
stock trading. But over like a period of like decades, you know, where fads come in and out and you know, like it actually matters what the truth is or something. That's the kind of
Right.
funny thing. Medicine, it matters what the truth is. There are a couple other fields where it matters what
Yeah.
the truth is. And the
Yeah.
chicken people can't really control it because the truth ultimately prevails.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Great way to put it. And I deal with this every once in a while in healthcare. And I just say, hey, this is the evidence. Okay. This is what your MRI shows. This is what your X-ray shows. This is what your blood test shows. Based upon everything we have here, and I know you don't want this to be the case. I get it. I understand that. But here's the deal. It looks like you've got rheumatoid arthritis and it's destroying your joints, and you're going to have to go on a biologic to stop it, or you're going to not have functional fingers by the time, in the next 15 years, and,
Yeah.
et cetera. So you have to have those. It's very easy for me. I can see some of my coworkers like, man, I just don't want to have this conversation with this person. I'm like, I'll talk to them. Let me talk to them. And it just, the problem with me is that I have to work to be compassionate, and it show it in the tone of my voice. To me, telling you the truth is being compassionate, regardless of the tone of my voice. And so for me, it's exhausting. It can be exhausting to have to do that, but I do it because I know that's what people need. And for the benefit of them, I know that's what they need. And if I was in a similar situation, I would want them to try to understand me,
Right.
to try to help me. So there's that, there's that symbiotic relationship. And But, you know, ASPD today even still gets me in trouble. I'll give you a funny example. I like motorcycles. Imagine that, right? And I've been riding motorcycles since I was a kid. And they are dangerous. They're like, you know, and I've got buddies and we ride. And they're like, oh, they're not that. I'm like, no, come on, dude. You could do everything right, and you are being run into a person with a metal cage around them. You're doing everything right. You're following all the rules, all the driving rules. And this person just looked down at their phone for a second, right? And you get run off the road, you run into a tree and you're gone. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but the thing is, a lot of people with ASPD and really cluster B disorders in general love motorcycles and love snowmobiles and like skiing and snowboarding and skateboarding and anything that gets the old adrenal cortex going. And the thing that is getting better but is still there is the impulsivity.
Mm.
And whew, and a couple of months ago, this was late October, I was riding my bike down the road and I just wanted to see, you know, what it would do. And I hit the rev limiter, which the rev limiter is the limit that the computer on your motorcycle sets to where you cannot go over that. And because if you do, you're gonna destroy the engine. It's
Mm.
just going to come apart because of centrifugal forces and all that stuff. It's going to fly apart. Well, if you bounce off the rev limiter, like if you bounce off the rev limiter enough, you do it enough, you know, you can still destroy your engine. And that's exactly what I did. And I did it knowing what I was doing and having advised other people, hey man, don't do this. And I did it myself, and it was fun, but it cost me another engine. Now I put the other engine in the bike, got it going, it's running great, but I still, you know, at 50 years old, I still have to work to not do that.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I mean it's a thing. I will say this, you know, people talk about some people with ASPD, they get better when they get older, and some of them don't. I have gotten better as I've gotten older. I've definitely mellowed out and gotten better um, as I've gotten older. And I'm super thankful for that. Um, I remember like one time we were in church and we were having that like after church, everybody's fellowship and talking and chatting, you know, in the room there, and you know, music's not playing anymore. People are just hanging out, talking. Hey man, how you doing? You know, whatever. And I had a guy come up and it's just an acquaintance. It wasn't a real close friend. He came up and he put his hand on the back of my neck, and it triggered me because my dad used to beat me and hit me on the back of the neck, and I just turned around and did like this beautiful 6 o'clock spinning elbow to the top of his head, right in the middle of exactly. This was like I was like 26 and knocked him out, like knocked him
Wow.
out cold right in front of everybody. And at the time, I was doing some full contact kickboxing, been doing martial arts my whole life, and I was like, oh my gosh, I just killed this guy, and he was. But that is an example. That was more PTSD than anything else. But that's an example of how therapy can make stuff like that better,
Mm.
and impulsivity and gaining insight into how your actions can harm yourself and others, and not just with, you know, like violence and physically, but just like psychologically and mentally. And because of the cold, callous, and unemotional nature of my personality, it's very easy um, for me to lose sight of that. And I need to be reminded of that, you know, on a semi-regular basis. Hey man, let's, you know, stick to the plan. The other thing too is like my therapist is using what's called mentalization based therapy. And it's the basis of it is basically that you need to maintain a flexibility within the rigidity of your worldview.
Yeah.
There are certain presuppositions that you cannot and should not give up. Like, you know, it's always wrong to torture little girls for fun, right? I mean, you should not give that up. That's unacceptable under any, regardless of how you feel or what you don't feel but there are other things that you need to hold loose handedly. and you might be wrong about in your worldview, and you need to be open about that. And so just having someone that can help sit down and walk you through that and give you examples of that professionally, and that's what they do for a living. Stuff like that's been super helpful because I would not have, I mean, it would have taken me a lot of really detailed reading of like research literature, which I don't have time to do,
Yeah.
to get that, to gain that. And it's just a lot easier just to pay somebody that does it for a living, that went to school for, 8 years to figure out how to do it. But I don't know, it's like your therapist ever said like, man, you've really, I mean, like you are an enigma. I don't run across many people like you, or, because mine's told me, he's like, I don't, he says, I've only had a few true psychopaths, sociopaths. He said, you're one of the few. Um, but I think most of the time they're just dealing with like depression, anxiety disorders, and
Yeah.
that kind of stuff you know that most folks have. Um,
I bet that's true that, and I think some of them, some therapists, if they found out that you were, antisocial personality disorder, they would not treat you. Number
right.
one, I think, and I almost wonder if this is kind of why you ended up with a borderline personality disorder uh diagnosis at
Diagnosis.
all. Yeah,
Yeah.
since there's not an accepted treatment, then
Hmm.
I think it can be considered unethical to treat somebody with antisocial personality disorder.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
definitely can't bill the insurance company or whatever for it, because what treatment are you using? There's not any known treatment, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. My therapist and my psychiatrist won't put it on my chart.
Yeah.
They said because your insurance may not cover these services. They just treat me for PTSD.
Oh,
That's
really?
what they form, which I did have and have had, but did EDM EMDR for that, eye movement direction reprocessing. That helped a lot.
Huh.
Yeah,
I
that
don't
helped a
even know what
lot.
that is. What is it?
Yeah, so it's basically because of trauma, and that creates certain, over time, if you're continually subjected to traumatic experiences, like if a child lives in a war zone, or human trafficking, or child trafficking, or something like that, or where you're in a like a decade long domestic violence situation, that literally can rewire your prefrontal cortex and your amygdala and all of that jazz. And so through EMDR, it's eye movements. It's like usually lateral eye movements they use, and you can either do it with a metronome if you're doing like telehealth visits with your therapist, or you can do it with a stick. There's a little stick that they use to help
Mm.
guide your eyes, and you will actually process the trauma while your eyes are moving side to side. And there's a neurological phenomena that causes a desensitization of the fight response, which was my primary problem.
Yeah.
Um, and it helps you reprocess that in such a way that you don't see everything or most things as a potential threat, and then you get easily triggered. So obviously I'm not doing a very good job explaining it, but it's a very effective technique. Very straightforward, a lot of good research behind it. And I found it to be, I mean, it's literally been for me life changing. Um, and I had to have that. I mean, like this was probably 20 years ago. This always happens in Walmart parking lots. If you want to be subjected to robbery, crime, or whatever, be in a Walmart parking lot, especially after 7:30 p.m. There's actually a lot of research behind that, by the way, that there's a high crime rate in a Walmart parking lot. But
Huh.
yeah, I'm not picking on Walmart people. I go to Walmart too. But the we were in the Walmart parking lot, and my wife, I was laid back. It's a beautiful day, middle of the day. This was like pre-smartphone era, which is really good. You're going to understand why I mentioned that here in a minute. But we're riding through the parking lot, and I can hear tires screech, and I'm laid back. And in my state, we have concealed carry, so I had my gun on me, and I was concealing, legally. And I'm laid back and kind of taking a semi nap, got the seat laid back in the car so you can't see me. And I'm not a big dude at all, you know. But I'm laid back. My 8-year-old daughter's in the back seat. Um, she's in a little, no, she's not in a car seat, but she's in the back seat. Wife's driving. She's like, dude, what's your problem? And you hear a horn, hear a horn honk. You hear somebody yelling, some dude yelling. My wife parks and I'm getting ready to get out to go in with her. I'm raising the seat back up and the dude didn't see me. He comes up and he starts just banging on her window on her driver's side. He says, "You effing B, I'm gonna." Blah, blah, blah. And he's yelling, and I said, "Oh hell no!" And I got up, got out of the car, drew my weapon, drew down on him over the top of the car, and I'm like cussing and yelling at the guy. I said, "I'm gonna ventilate you, you MFer." I said, "You back," and I was like, "Please let me shoot you." And but my whole point in bringing that up was that when you've been subjected to abuse for, decades, in my case, 13 straight years, you reach a point where, at least I can tell you, for me, it happened when I was 11 years old, where for me, there was a switch that flipped in my mind where I said, if this guy this is not my dad anymore. If this guy does one more thing to me or my mother, I am going to kill him in his sleep.
Yeah.
And that's when ASPD can be really bad. That's when you can turn into that criminal, that serial killer, that murderer. If that's not caught early and there's not a major drastic change in the situation, and in my case, there was, thankfully. My dad left soon thereafter, but yeah, I mean, that mentality, once that switch flipped, it kind of never. I mean, I had to do therapy for years to get it to toggle it down. You know what I'm saying? And the EMDR really helped with that. It really helped toggle that down. And but yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mess with people. I was cool, but if you threaten my wife or my family, I would kill you and enjoy it. And that is I wasn't scared about it. There was no flight response, no fawn, no freeze. Those were gone. Those had been gone since I was probably 10 years old. And just all of that normal stuff was just totally gone. So I'll be honest with you, martial arts, a good mother, and frankly, church saved me. It kept me from becoming a criminal, because the psychological predisposition, the genetics, everything is certainly there. But I'm super thankful, that God gave me a great mom. I'm thankful that, she got remarried to an awesome dude. My stepdad is great. He and I mean, I call him dad, we get along great together. And honestly, it was good too, because he was a cop. He's a
Mm.
retired police officer. It was good for me to have to be, because I like going fast in the car, and but yeah, I mean, what's it like to be me? I mean, probably a lot of what it's like to be you. You have to work to make decisions that are what's best for, the people around you, the best as you can tell. Um, and you don't one of the problems too is you don't realize that, like, when people talk about love, you don't realize that, like, oh, okay, so you think of love that way. Well, I've never thought of it that way. Or I like that you get on the issue of empathy. Well, I've never thought like that. And you're like, oh, I am a lot different than everybody else. And you just don't realize it because you've been that way your whole life and you don't know it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it's like. I mean, obviously it doesn't hurt my feelings. It's just I've learned, okay, that's what that is. And it doesn't bother me that I'm like that, but I recognize that it can be a serious problem in relationships and work relationships. And, I cannot be cold, callous, and unemotional. I have to recognize and acknowledge and, validate other people's emotional states, and they're human. That's the way God made them. And, me, I'm not like that. That's not the way I'm made. I'm not wired that way. And I have to understand that most people are not like me, and it's okay. Radical acceptance, right? And you just roll with it and you figure it out. And the thing about being diagnosed later in life is that I'd already figured out a lot of this stuff already on my own, because to be a successful psychopath, a successful ASPDer, and to get it to the subclinical functional level, you just have to do that. It's either that or you're going to end up dead or in prison, at least in my case. Um, I know that sounds morbid. I'm not trying to be morbid. I'm not a morbid person. I appreciate you smiling.
Mm.
I'm a, I prefer to have a smile than a frown, but just trying to be brutally honest, for the sake of the truth. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. I think it's really interesting. One thing that you said a little earlier and you've kind of touched on is like this, through therapy you've learned to hold beliefs. I think you, what did you say, softer hands or something? That's the
Yeah,
phrase I use.
loosely. Some of the
Loosely.
you have to have loose. It has to be loose-handed. There's some things you cannot give up. There are tight-fisted presuppositions that you have to hold on to, or else you lose grip on reality.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
like
Yes.
like yeah,
And I
yeah.
think that's really interesting. So this is like I have never really thought about this connection before until you kind of said this, but it's the connection between that and impulsivity. Because
Hmm.
I think, I have kind of intuited about myself that that's a really good for my brain. Like it's very good for my brain. It's very good for my everything to try to be looser with my beliefs
Hmm.
and to try to even like regularly like double check my beliefs and break my beliefs, and just to try, like it's been kind of like a goal, active goal of the past couple of years, is to try to accept reality as it is, kind of radical acceptance, like you say. But I
Yeah.
never made this connection between that and impulsivity. But it kind of
Hmm.
makes sense because if you're able to do that, number one, you're seeing reality a little bit better. But number two, like I do think impulsivity kind of stems from just it does seem like an anecdote or antidote to impulsivity, and I don't know, maybe you have some thoughts about it, but maybe it's because like the impulsivity itself is like a rigid belief. It's like this thing must be done now. And so if you're able
Right.
to kind of loosen up on any beliefs, if you're able to kind of put just a little bit of like relaxation
Hmm.
into that, the way that you hold that belief, it does seem to like improve the impulsivity like quite a bit.
Yes. Yeah, and I've actually kind of figured that out through the years. But it's the flexibility in the rigidity.
Yeah.
Don't hold every, it's flexible. It's that mentalization based therapy. There's a lot of really good videos on this, by the way. And this is the only therapy that they found that, as far as a system, that works really good with people with ASPD that want to change.
What
It's the
is
only one they found. It's MB, I think it's called MBT, but it's
uh,
MBT, and
okay. And
mentalization based treatment.
what is the like what is the mental like what does it mean to mentalize or something? What is the thing that you
So it's
do?
it's to it's to look at an for example, it's to look at an entire situation. Let's say you come up on a situation where you've got maybe a 5-year-old son, and he comes in and he says, "Hey, I was out here playing with my friend Billy, and Billy and I were in the sandbox, and he took my Tonka truck, and I punched him in the face." And you're like, "Yeah, ASPD parent, yeah, he don't hurt me, don't take my stuff, right? And, Tuttle twins, we're going to teach him to be a good libertarian. Yeah, don't take my stuff. I'm only going to defend myself if I absolutely have to. And look at what you made me do, Billy.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I broke your nose at 5, but mentalization based, and that's a silly example, but mentalization based treatment would say you have to look at, not only take into consideration the entire scope of what's going on. Your desire as a parent is to justify your kid, and you really shouldn't be doing that. What you should be doing is looking not only at your kid, protecting your own child, but you also got to try to look at Billy's welfare, because if Billy's welfare isn't considered, then it's going to hurt you.
Mm.
So there's the flexibility in the rigidity. And this applies to everything, from philosophy to theology to you have to, and you can actually see this in the New Testament. Um, you can see a change from the old covenant to the new covenant.
Hmm.
There is a discern. There's rigidity there. There's still love God, love your neighbor. That never changes. That's been there from Genesis all the way to the end of the New Testament. But the way that that is manifested is culturally dependent.
Hmm.
The way that that is manifested is individually considered, but the law itself never changes. But it has to conform. There has to be some flexibility within the rigidity of that inviolable moral principle. And so if you let go of the necessary rigidity, you lose touch with reality, and you not only harm others, you harm yourself. You will harm yourself. And so that's the mentalization based approach. It's allowing you, it's teaching you how to recognize when you need to have that flexibility
Hmm.
in that situation, in your mental schema or in your mental structure, in your worldview. Um, so I've been doing a lot of reading on that, and that really helps. It's really been helping. Now, one of the guys, one of the researchers, it's really kind of one of the top dogs in that area. His name is Bateman. Bateman. I think it's Andrew Bateman. Um, but yeah, you can look it up and read about it. But yeah, it's good stuff. Super helpful. You know, but yeah, I think I'm a huge fan, a big advocate of trying to help people with mental health issues, kids, recognizing, being like what I call a mental health first aider.
Hmm.
And I'm not a professional and I'm never going to be in that area, but being able to recognize, I've had patients that have come in with undiagnosed ASPD or borderline or something's going on. And I'm like, hey, how you doing? And being able to, I can cognitively empathize with those people because I can really see that they're struggling. They're struggling bad. And their life's the wheels are coming off on their life as I'm talking to them. And, I think that while I don't have a quiver in the liver about them, I can certainly cognitively empathize with that person and say, man, I need to help this person. And I need to, and again, that's that schema based approach. That's that worldview based approach. If I help them, then it's going to ultimately come back and do good to me. It's the sowing and reaping thing. Again, if you want to talk about theology, it's the you sow good, you are going to have some good come back to you. If you try to do what's right and true, it may cost you, especially temporarily, whether a job or whatever, but you just have to be, as an ASPD person, because we're not quiver in the liver people. We're not led by our emotions. We're not led by the crowd. We have to be people of inviolable principle and people of truth. And if you're not, if you're just nihilistic, that's the serial killer.
Yeah.
If you're just, I'm in it for me, then you're going to end up on death row. Those are the low functioning sociopaths and psychopaths of our world. And then the moderately functioning psychopaths of our world tend to become very famous dictators and presidents. And, not always, they're not all psychopaths. I'm not saying that, but and we all know that the more moderately functioning ones end up in those areas. So I want to be the best high functioning person with ASPD that I can be. And I recognize that there are things that I just don't have, and I'm never going to have them that most people have. And I have to use them, if possible, for the good of my family, my children, my wife, my society, the people that I work with on the job. So,
Yeah. I feel the same way. I feel like I was made different, but
mhm.
like I want to be the best me that I can be. And I feel about it like in a religious way too. Do
Yes,
you know what's the Chariots of Fire guy, the runner?
yes,
Yeah.
yep, yes, yeah.
Yeah,
I feel his pleasure.
yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, the same way. Yeah.
Yeah. So for people that don't know this one, I think it's like, yeah, God made me whatever, but God also made me fast. And
God made me fast.
when
Hmm.
I run, I
Right.
feel his pleasure.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's the way I feel. I mean, I can remember the first emergency that I responded to. It's a guy that was dying of a heart attack, CPR. I did CPR on him. I got his pulse back, and I mean, he died. He eventually ended up dying, but I mean, there were a group of people standing around him, and I was able to, thankfully comfort the family. But that was when I really started to see that these traits, this personality that I have, really can be super helpful, can be super useful, and everybody else is losing it. Like their brain, I call it their brains turn into oatmeal. They just can't think. They can't think on their feet. They can't critically think. And I just think, I mean, honestly, you can either choose to look at anything as a blessing or a curse in some ways. And I choose to look at this and choose to use this as a tool for good. And I'm going to. I'm doggedly committed to that. I just refuse to be my father. I absolutely refuse to be my father. I'm not going to repeat his sins. I'm not going to repeat his evil, his errors, and I'm going to use this for good to the best of my ability, as I have opportunity. So, and I think, talking about religion and theology, I think there's people like, you look at King David, and I mean, David was a warrior. He was also a lover. He was all over the place. You read about what he said in the Psalms, and you're like, dude, you're either like you're like a border path dude. You've got borderline and some ASPD going on, or you definitely King Nebuchadnezzar, super big fat narcissist. And you're just like, man, this is all through scripture, but it's just people, human beings, broken people, and learning how one way or another to hopefully use this for good and get better and help make the world a better place instead of dragging it down. And I think that's the thing that bums me out about ASPD is there's very few resources that are out there that present this from, hey, this is treatable and this is not all ASPD people turn into I'm going to burn your house down criminals and serial killers. And there's a boatload of these people that are working as paramedics, special forces, da, 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 and they are the people, they're some of the people that are helping defend our nation, keeping things going and running because they are able to stay cool under pressure and they can get it done. And it's not just ASPD people, it's people from all different walks of life and different personalities. But I would just would like, that's one thing I really appreciate about what you are trying to do. Is like why I reached out. Like, wow, thanks. Thanks for trying to show that, hey, not all of us are these raving lunatics or run around trying to hurt everybody and hurt the world. And, you kind of like in the what was the Batman movie where some people just want to see the world burn. They don't care about power or money. I'm like, yeah, that's the person with ASPD that's on the low end of the spectrum, and they're just like, man, I don't really give a crap, and I just want to hurt people and hurt stuff and break things and raise hell, and okay, well, let me know how that works out for you, just take a look, but yeah, I mean, and I really appreciate that about the Psychopathy as website. They um, really try to do a good job of showing that and giving you examples of people who, in their some of their videos of people who, hey, we have ASPD, we have psychopathy, we function, we do fine, you know, we live our lives, we have families, we have friends, we have et cetera. This is doable, this is treatable. We're not all raving lunatics and serial killers. So
Yes, yes. Big shout out to Psychopathy is the only nonprofit I know of that is even like remotely interested in helping people with the condition itself, as opposed to just like the victims of the psychopaths. If people listening to this, if you have the ability to donate, please donate. I know that it takes a certain amount of funds to keep that website up and running
mhm.
and trying to provide the information that they do, and to all sorts of people, parents of people who have children that have these sorts of issues, these sorts of tendencies. And we all know that early intervention for everything is the best.
Yes,
So I just think they do such great work, and try to support them however I can.
that's awesome. That's awesome. I second that. Absolutely.
Well, we're actually a little past our deadline, our self-imposed deadline of what we're doing. Do you have anything to kind of say to wrap up?
No, I just want to say thank you for having me on. It was truly a joy to talk to you, and it's a breath of fresh air. When I find other people that have ASPD and they're functional, they're high functioning, I get to talk to them. It's really a blessing because I can really relate to them. They can really relate to me, and we can actually have just a great conversation. Just about life because there's so much that we can relate to. And I appreciate this opportunity. And again, I just want to tell people, hey, if you suspect that you have ASPD or honestly any mental health issue, don't do what I did and wait, decades to get help. Because you can end up doing a lot of damage to your family, your friends, your loved ones, and just kind of leaving a trail of tears, as it were, a trail of destruction. So don't do that. Don't do that to yourself. Don't do it to others. Go get help. Go figure out what's going on. Let these people help you. They went to school for a long time to figure out how to do this, and there are a lot of people out there that can help us. It may take a minute, but just like any other doctor, you got to find the right one for you that's a good fit, and you'll find it. So do that. And again, thank you. Much appreciated.
Well, thank you so much, and thanks for that endorsement, and thanks for teaching me some things. Likewise to everything you said about what a pleasure it is to speak to like-minded people, and especially, I definitely learned and will keep thinking about this connection between holding your beliefs more gently and the connection to impulsivity and follow up on some
Mm,
of these treatments you suggested. In fact, if you have some good links, then send them to me and we can post
sure.
them. Yeah, post them
Yeah,
so people can check
absolutely.
it out. All right. It was so good talking to you, Inigo. And
You
hopefully
too.
we'll get to chat in the future again.
That'll be awesome. Thank you so much.
Later, Bill.